Hello, everyone. Greetings from Los Angeles. I am Jay Wang, Director of the USC Center on Public Diplomacy. Welcome to CPD Conversation Series. Today's program is a special presentation in partnership with the Black Policy Institute based in London. Our event will focus on the development of artificial intelligence in Africa, which is an integral part of the global discussion on AI, its ethical considerations, and policy frameworks. Understanding AI in Africa is not just about adopting new technologies, but also about harnessing their potential to address local challenges, promote economic empowerment, and sustainable development. I am very delighted to welcome our speakers, and the discussion will be moderated by Chimdi Igwe, AI in Africa Research Project Lead at the Black Policy Institute. Chimdi is a doctoral researcher at University College London, specializing in cybersecurity. He received his Master of Engineering at Imperial College London and was a consulting engineer for Cisco. Chimdi will introduce our panelists, and for our audience, please share comments and questions anytime during the program. Welcome, Chimdi. Very nice to have you, and I turn the program over to you now.
Thanks, Jay, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Chimdi Igwe, and I'm with the Black Policy Institute. We are a think tank that's focused on generating policy solutions, focusing on the Afro-Caribbean and Black diasporas. We're very interested in artificial intelligence and its impact on Africa, African citizens, organizations, and states. And so therefore, we're so happy for this collaboration with the Center on Public Diplomacy to have this panel event. I'm very excited to have my panelists, esteemed panelists here today, who I'll be introducing shortly. We have with me Dr. David Ifeoluwa Adelani, who's a Google DeepMind Academic Fellow at the University College London and incoming Assistant Professor at McGill University. We have Jabal Anthem, who is co-founder of Coltis Ghana, a software consulting firm, and Secure Central, a cybersecurity firm, both based in Accra. We have Ayomide Oyemi, who is a current research assistant in health informatics at University of Illinois, Chicago, where he's also doing his PhD. And we have Busi Matsiko Andan, who is a consultant, advisor, and global strategist. Thank you all for joining me. Just so you all know, as I'm asking these questions and we're having this conversation, feel free to send your questions, as Jay said, using the Q&A functions in the chat. So if my panelists would happily join me now, that would be great. Thank you all for joining. So just since we have you all from such different fields, I'm very curious to ask, really, just to start off, how does AI interact with your work? Those of you who are more technical and more academic, what forms of artificial intelligence do you use or research or implement? If we could start with David, could you please just tell us a bit more about what you do?
Oh, okay, thank you. So I'm David of Ifeoluwa Adelani. So I currently work at University College London, and I work in the field of artificial intelligence, a branch called natural language processing, which is understanding language, whether spoken or written, using computer tools. And my current focus has been how to leverage natural language processing to understand African languages and low-resource languages in different parts of the world. So I naturally do AI every day because I want to understand African languages and how current large language models, how they can be used for African languages, and how can we build like similar technology for our languages. This is what I work on currently.
Thanks, David. Ayomide, if you don't mind going.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ayomide. So my background is actually in medicine. But over the past 6 years, I've been working around health informatics and AI. And as everybody knows, when people think about AI, one of the places people imagine AI making a significant difference is healthcare. So for me, my research has been on two fronts. One is that I presently work as a data scientist trying to use AI models to understand patients that might have long COVID, which is like one of the biggest things post-COVID era, well, still in COVID era, so to speak. And then the other thing is that my research, which is my PhD thesis, is focused mainly on how to help people building AI solutions or tools, especially for healthcare use cases, to build them better, to understand how to build tools that would be adopted, that will have impact, and then that people will find quite useful, which is like one of the biggest challenges in healthcare right now. A lot of people are building tools, but those tools don't get to translate into the real life. So my research is focused around helping those people ensure that the tools they build are more useful in the real life.
Thank you. Jabbar, if you would.
Yeah, thank you very much. We are into software engineering and cybersecurity, making sure that we transform the African continent using technology and building upon AI for the future.
Thank you. And Busi, would you mind going? Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you, Chimdi. When I hear all this, it's exciting because I'm about amplifying Africa and its diaspora. And so for me, as an entrepreneur who has lived on both the continents as well as in the West, I'm just I'm a tech entrepreneur, having founded one of the first fashion technology companies, and then being an advisor, pushing for our voices to be heard. For me, it's imperative that we are not left behind as this AI takes effect, because yes, technology in the West is an innovation, while in Africa, it's the beginning. But sometimes we're so worried about the future with AI, and we can't push it under the rug. We definitely need to address it and be part of it, lest decisions will be made without us concerning the continent. And it's important to create that level field by empowering people about knowing about AI and knowing it's already here. It's not going anywhere. And it's up to you to embrace it and come up with solutions or be part of solutions, or you're in trouble.
Thank you. It's great to hear you already start to point out the parallel, the differences between the landscape in African countries versus Western countries. Because I'd like, if we could, for us to tease at that a bit more. I guess if we start with you, Ayomide, could you just tell us a bit more about what differentiates the current tech landscape in Africa versus, say, in the West? And if we could then move on to artificial intelligence and how that plays a role in that.
Yeah, so I think one way to sort of describe the current landscape, sort of refers to what Busi mentioned, the fact that a lot of things are quite rudimentary on the continent to a certain extent. Yes, we have a couple of advancements too that we could say are to some extent at par with what obtains, but a lot of things are rudimentary. And the reason why those things are is because of the level of developments we have on the continent. There's a wide disparity in both continents, which is why interestingly, a lot of the people that are sort of pushing the borders or pushing the boundaries that are Africans are usually doing that from abroad, because the reason is that some of the most important infrastructure support that you need do not exist quite well back home. You need GPUs, you need access to the internet, you need stable power supply, you need funding. A lot of the funding for tech in Africa comes from abroad. I think I can't remember the specific data, but most of the funding come from the US, for example. Not so many come from home. So there are those issues that exist, that sort of creates that disparity in what you can obtain. And if you bring it into AI, you say the same thing. You talk about manpower, you talk about resources, you talk about data, for example, which is like the lifeblood of AI. A lot of solutions at times that are being deployed in healthcare, for example, on the continent, are based on data that are not from the continent. There's data on the continent, but the problem lies in the accessibility of that data or who can use that data in the first instance. So there are a couple of all those challenges that sort of bedevil tech on the continent. The great thing, though, is the fact that despite all these challenges, people who are doing tech on the continent are squeezing water from stone. But the challenge lies in the fact that a lot of those things are not sustainable because the basic infrastructure are not there, and then there's a limit to how much you can innovate, how much you can do. So that's what the tech landscape looks like, and when you bring it to AI, there are similarities.
Yeah. Jabbar, since you are on the ground in Accra as well, do you have anything else to add to that? You're on mute, sorry.
Well, if you look at what is happening in the continent, like Ayo said about funding-related issue, AI is transforming Africa, and mostly, like I always say, it's our policy-related issues, where the data sits, who controls the data, how are the policy being implemented. If you look at the Western countries, the United States is spending a lot of money on research on policy towards AI. When you go to China, China is spending a lot of money. Now, when you come to Africa, we have a lot of problems when it comes to research and innovation. And these are what are driving the global economy when it comes to technology now. So for me, we need to look at the policy framework. If you look at the EU is more advanced when it comes to their policy. What they have done. When you look at China, China has strategy 2025. They want to take global economy using AI. Now, when you come to Africa, it's quite different. It was recently that African Union launched what we call the digital transformation strategy. And also when it comes to data protection, the Data Protection Convention also came together to see how they can be able to put policies that will regulate this industry, where we can have ethical use of AI. So basically, from that point of view, for me, technology is here with us, and Africa has the biggest opportunity transforming our economies. Now, if you go to Nigeria, I'm quite impressed about how Nigeria is handling the issue about AI. Their agenda 2020-2023, they brought a strategy about digital economy and formulating AI policies. So for me, this is where we have to look at. Innovation is something we have to, the opportunities are there, but like I said, the manpower, the skills are limited. That is where we have to really look at. It's not just about doing research. It's also about training young people to, in terms of, we are focusing only in agri, health, and education. We don't think about the industrial revolution when it comes to the manufacturing, the mining sector, how we are going to use AI. And even with our governance structure, we are not even implementing AI in our governance structure. So for me, this is something we have to look at.
Busi, I don't know if you have any insight on this you'd like to.
Yes, I definitely do have a, I'm so proud of what our brothers Ayomide and Jabbar have talked about on the continent. I mean, I've had the privilege of going to the continent even post me relocating here, spent time even at the Ghana Tech Hub, seen someone build what do they call it? A drone, and we have the talent. I mean, we have the youngest population. We have the intelligence. We have seen our brain drain happen all the time. Technology has helped Africa leapfrog And COVID-19 has shown that. I mean, look at it, how many unicorns came out post-COVID, right? And how much has the continent raised for these for technology and this AI during this period. I'm hopeful that there's a lot in terms of what the continent can do, what the people of the continent can do in part of this journey. What I can also say is that when you think about this AI technology, I mean, just look at fintech as what Ayomide said. There's some things that are rudimentary, but there's some things that are advanced. Take, for instance, fintech, the mobile money. We are at the, no one beats the continent with regards to fintech now, and we are seeing companies like MasterCard, as well as, MasterCard, Visa, being interested in those technologies and seeing how they can apply them in, say, South America. You know, my concern more right now, and this is from a civil society point of view, as well as a policy point of view, is, are we protecting our intellectual property? How are we protecting our IP? And how do we partner? And this comes back to education as well as knowing what you're dealing with, because sometimes you think you're just giving, you're volunteering, you're doing this and that, but you're actually the talent. So how do you also protect the talent? But how do you make sure these partnerships and collaborations are intentional and a win-win for everyone involved? And for me, that's what I want to see more of in this AI conversation, because there are two ways how it will impact us, but also what are the opportunities for the entrepreneurs and us to continue to grow in these areas.
Yeah. And David, I believe Ayomide mentioned earlier about data and the accessibility to data. And this discussion about AI systems controlling intellectual property and intellectual capital. Since your work deals with, as you just discussed, low resource languages, African languages, how does that availability to data, which we would presume would be large volumes of data you require, how does that affect the work you do? How easy is that for practitioners and for institutions? And are there any specific considerations that you have to put into place when constructing your large language models or natural language processing with African languages, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, even when I started working on this research during my PhD, the first challenge I faced was lack of data. There was just nothing to work on in terms of labeled data. So there are kind of two, I can say we have like two kinds of data, especially for NLP. One that is annotated, that you need to get people to do the annotations before you can use the data. And then another one that you can just use any text you find online and then combine them together to train a language model, very similar to how these big models like Llama or GPT has been trained. So in both cases for African languages, there's a problem, or let's say there are challenges. For the free text online, we have very few of those. When I said few, I mean, in terms of language model, you need like gigs and gigs of data. Like the English models are trained on terabytes of data. So if you have just like a few gigabytes, I think for the Nigerian languages, maybe, except for Hausa, none has up to a gig of data. All of them are just like maybe 200 MB, Igbo like 500 MB, and Hausa like, let's say 1.5 gigabyte. So you don't even have enough data to train a language model on. And the current models we have now are more data hungry. They require more data. They require more user interactions. So it's a problem. And in terms of annotated data, also this is very scarce because you need people to do the annotations. So the strategy we used and is what is called participatory research, where you work with communities that own the data, or that use the data, and then you try to collaborate with them, try to explain what you're doing, and if they see the vision, you can create the data together. And also, you can also write for grants together, work on grants together, so that they can be paid for their work. And we call this participatory way of doing research. And it's very effective because we carry the people that will use the technology in the process, from data building to model building and to the user of the technology. And in terms of, and this is the way we have been able to address the problem, using a community-driven approach and participatory research to actually encourage the contribution of data for our languages. Yeah.
I think it's great that you've mentioned or touched on the idea of involving communities that are involved in that data collection, because a lot of the questions that we've got prior to this this webinar were asking about the ethics of data collection and how we're able, whether legal frameworks or ethical frameworks existed in or policies to ensure that that data access is equitable and it's not, the data sovereignty is still there. Jabbar, you mentioned that you touched on policy making earlier, and the role of what the Nigerian government, for example, is doing, and compare that to the African Union and the EU. I'm just wondering, what would you say based on what you've seen in the EU, for example, what would you say that are small, short-term or longer-term solutions, that policy actions that can be done to push African countries in the right direction?
I think everything about development or digital economy is about strategy, research, and policy. Now, if you look at what is happening in EU, America, and other aspects of the world, I think that we have to look at data governance, how we are going to govern data, how we are going to collect data, where data is stored, how data is being used responsibly and ethically. So these are some of the things we have to be looking at. Now, how do you also localize data? Localization of data is making sure that data sits within the jurisdiction of a country in terms of its national security and some of the issues that will erupt. When it comes to health, like IO is doing research on how are you going to manage your health data. Now, when you come to the continent of Africa, how are we going to have what we call collaboration, to be able to collaborate and build capacity in terms of having a regional database that we can able to utilize without it being compromised. So, like I said, we have to look at data governance. We have to look at localizing data. We have to also look at data protection policy. Now, one of the problems that you look at in Africa is that we are so isolated. It's not only about when it comes to trade that we are isolated. I mean, we are all, we are not united. We are not together when it comes to policy implementation. So Nigeria is drafting their data policy. South Africa is doing so. Ghana is doing so. Now, when you go to the regional bloc, where we have to centralize our operations and see how we can collaborate, there's nothing happening. So how can a Ghanaian and Nigerian collaborate when it comes to managing data ethically? Today, all the data that Google is collecting, who regulates it? That is why, personally, I'm very happy about how Nigerian government and Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenyan government are handling these multinational companies. Because today, Google is collecting data. Do you know what they use our data for? And like we said, data is the oil for our generation. So they collect data and they make policy that help them. So all we have to do is that we need to legislate, have a proper framework within our jurisdiction. Pan-African Parliament have to come together, get researchers. I'm also happy in Ghana here, KNUST is formulating a data strategy. But after universities have done their research, what's next? After working on this data, in fact, I'm part of Ghana Data Protection Commission. I've seen what the data protection is trying to do, but they are under-resourced. Chinese government the Europeans, they come here, they take our data. We cannot even monitor them. Now, when we go there, in fact, to go there and even set up a company, especially tech company, it's so difficult. I was in Malta and Netherlands looking at how they manage and formulate their data. Now, when you come to Ghana, anybody can just collect data. In Ghana, you have to be certified data protection practitioner before you can control, manage, or distribute data. Now, even the banks in Ghana are not complying with this. Why? Because these countries are under-resourced. These institutions are under-resourced. So how are we going to empower this institution to make sure that not just formulating these policies, but also making sure that the laws are being enforced? I hope the laws are being enforced so that we can be able to make sure that whatever data is being collected, data is being used the way it's supposed to use. Today, hospitals, people data are being collected. In fact, in 2019 or 2020, the Ghana's Data Electoral Commission, after exhibiting voters register, before we realized individual data are on the web. People are downloading this data. Now, even the Ghanaian community are not able to understand that, look, I need to sue the Electoral Commission for exposing my data. So for me, one, we have to look at our governance structure. Two, we have to work on implementing those laws. And three, we have to be collaborative. That is what can help us protect our data and use the data the right way. Because if the Europeans have our data, we don't have that data. They are going to use the data to even control us more. But when we have that access, we are able to control our data. When they come, we tell them what they are supposed to do, making sure that people who are collecting data are certified by the various commissions, and also making sure that we don't become so bureaucratic. If somebody is in Kenya and he's been certified by the Data Protection of African Union, he should be able to have access to Ghana's data, like I said, localizing and forming collaborating agenda for us to be able to work together. So this is what we should be looking at when it comes to formulating data.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. I'm just wondering, because you mentioned collaboration. I mean, if you could, do you have any other insights you could add to that, especially on that aspect of collaboration, specifically from your background as in healthcare and dealing with health data? Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
Oh, okay. So what I would say with regards to collaboration is the fact that, like Jabbar said, most African countries are sort of siloed. But I think even before we get to the area of collaboration, at a lower level, like you mentioned, we have problems with how we enforce rules or how we enforce laws that exist. So Nigeria has the NDPR, for example, which sort of governs how data is used, how it's stored, and then how it's shared, so to speak. But it's not enforced. There's no enforcement of those laws. And if we can't enforce those laws at the local level, then even if we collaborate, then there's the likelihood of the data being abused across borders. So that's one. But the second thing that comes up is the fact that we have the African Union, who is the body that is supposed to sort of manage a lot of these collaborations or create frameworks to support and or platform these collaborations. But it's a sort of disappointment that the African Union is not really stepping up as it should. And the problem is not just even in data or AI alone. If you look across issues that cut across the continent, the African Union is always lacking when it comes to a lot of things. You look at conflicts and a couple of other things. So I think what this sort of raises is the fact that the African Union needs to do much better than they're doing. I know they're sort of putting together some initiatives. I have a couple of people that are working with them on developing a policy, developing frameworks, but they need to do better. They need to be more proactive in that sense. Like, for example, like Jabbar mentioned, if you look at the European Union, it's a much stronger union. So they sort of have much stronger impact or much stronger pull on what happens across the continent, which is something the African Union does not have, but which is something that they need to build upon, which is something that they need to sort of work towards. So it's a two-level thing. We need to work better on the way things happen at home, like, enforcing the existing laws and then implementing new ones that are necessary. But we also need to sort of, at the level of the AU, which cut across the continent, find a way to pressure the AU to do better, to be more proactive. And there's a lot the AU can do. There's a need for example, there's a need for us to have. It won't be bad if, for example, we have a sort of open system that the AU sort of manages, where we have some sort of open data that researchers across the continent can sort of tap into for issues that are sort of related to countries that are on the continent. There's a limitations to what data from elsewhere can do. But if the AU can sort of create that, then it sort of, in a way, help countries that might not have enough capacity or power to create those on their own. So the AU has a significant role to play, and I just hope they step up and play that role.
Busi, you were raising your hand. Do you want to contribute? Oh, you're also on mute.
Yes. So I want to look at it from also another approach as well. And this is, yes, we definitely have to have a balanced approach when we're dealing with the issue of sovereignty and the face of all these influences on us and how we deal with this data. But at a much grassroots level, it's also empowering the locals on what AI is or what these technologies mean. And also because there are some things we need to, some mindset shifts, mindset changes, or could I also say unlearning and relearning of some things. And that's also when you talk about, in most cultures and most countries, they recognize certain professions and take them more serious than others. That is, you'd be surprised that people still say you have to be a lawyer, you have to be a doctor, you have to be an engineer, you have to be, an accountant, the major 4 or 5, right? And then don't take the other professions as seriously. Like if someone as a data scientist wouldn't be really taken as serious, and you'll be thinking at what are you trying to learn? And this starts with allowing, and maybe it's also from a scarcity point of view and concern that parents are worried about these things, but also teaching them. If your child shows these elements of enthusiasm and interests, we have to encourage that area, and also empowering our lead, because think about it, not all these politicians or people who run things are leaders. There's a misconception that politicians are leaders, people who are at the AU or government are leaders. Not everyone of that is. So how do we, in the interim, while we're figuring how government should operate or how the AU should operate, what can we do alongside to help us remove these bottlenecks, which are impeding the development, And I'm glad that such conversations like what is happening right now is happening, because that's a start. We're taking up this space, and people need to hear these conversations so that they can know what is at stake. And I think this will make it easier for the scientists in these spaces to do their work efficiently, and for accountability on these people who we call our leaders to take seriously. Just look at even the creative industry. It's not taken seriously in terms of funding, and yet it could bring in a lot of income, but it's not taken seriously enough. And then when you're talking about funders, how do we even get access to these funds? Because some of them, I would call them phantom funds. Oh, there's funding here, but getting those funds is next to impossible. So those are some of the conversations that can happen alongside as we're figuring these policy structures, these governmental structures to help facilitate.
Yeah, and I think a lot of you have mentioned kind of ties into the idea of cyber diplomacy, sort of states trying to, going back to what Ayomide said, especially about the AU developing sort of open data access systems. One of the questions, if I look at the submitted questions we've got here, very interestingly, was asking about, assuming it's related to brain drain and how to combat that. Well, it uses the example of Chinese scholarships to African students. And I'm just wondering, David, if you don't mind, just how would you, from a policy perspective, how do we combat that drain of intellectual capital away from African systems and countries?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is the second challenge we are always facing, because we have a lot of people relocating quite a lot. So as you train them, they just disappear. We have a word we use in Nigeria called japa, which means people just go with what they have learned. And this has affected a lot of fields, like in the medicine, like a lot of doctors left. And also in AI, we have a lot of software engineers and computer scientists that have left the country. And we have had issues where some banks complain that some of their experts left and they're having issues with some of their services. So like someone has told me, he said, oh, you have a huge population, you can train and retrain. And actually this is reality, that we actually have a large population and we could train a lot of people. And we have to find a way to democratize this process so that large number of people will be trained and then they could influence their communities. We cannot stop people from leaving. It has happened like that in other countries, like in India, a lot of people left and now they came back to positively influence their country. So I think those people that are left can be blessing in the future to those countries, but we have to find a way. How can we encourage more skill acquisition? For example, someone already mentioned Nigerian government, which there are small steps. For example, they have a large scale training of people in tech. I don't remember the exact name, is like 3 million talents or something. So this large scale investment, even though they have learned a little, and then they can advance their skill later on. And we can do this and we have to encourage that. So we have to really improve our education system to really train a lot of talent. And if we train a lot of talent, every other place in the world, they are seeking for talent. We can provide enough talents for ourselves and also for others, just because of our population.
I think, just to add up to what David said, you see, recently, if you observe what the European countries are doing, they are sort of computer scientists. They are looking for young, energetic people. And my company, we're able to train over 150 students from the universities. And we do this to make sure that we encourage building local talents. We bring you on board, train you, and give you some little allowance that it can help you. Now, in 2017 or so, there was an issue about fall armyworm in Africa. A company contacted us that they want us to assist them. Now, what we did was that we built an application that can detect diseases on crops like maize. And so the team we used, more than half of them have left the country. Now, these are people we have trained. These are talented young people who are living, looking for opportunities. By then, it is not only in the tech space, health, other technical spaces, people are leaving the country. But what I think is that, like David said, we need to continue training these people. We don't leave government alone for government, we say that government, they are doing that because of politics. And you know, African politicians, they are not looking for impact. They are looking for votes. So they say we have trained 2,000 people. Meanwhile, when you go on the ground, it's like some 500 or 200 people they have trained, and these people are not well equipped. So in Ghana, there's Ghana Tech Lab, collaborated by MasterCard Foundation, and they are training a lot of young people. Now, what we have decided to do as a company is that we want to get a strategy, get an external partner who could help us, because all this is about funding as well. And my sister said it's about trying to access funding, which is very difficult. So, and also universities. If you look at how we train people, student they come out of university with degree in computer science or cybersecurity. They can't do anything. So these universities are not even helping us to be able to make sure that we produce quality. Now, the quality that industry produce end up leaving the country. So it creates a lot of gap in here. But people who are listening to this conversation, what I will say is that Africa is the future. And all we have to do is that the gaps that are being created, we need to fill in those gaps and try to preach to our young people that, look, you don't need to go out there. Even in Africa, if you are skilled, is valued. If you are in a company and they value your skills, they would, in terms of remuneration, they will give you a good remuneration. So looking at brain drain around African young people, it will continue to happen. Like you said, in Nigeria, we also in Ghana, we adopted Nigeria, we call it Japa. Even in our place, the people, some of the people we have trained have left the country. So these are things that we'll continue to see. But all we need to do is that we have to be very innovative. I come back again on the issue of collaboration. Universities, government, and my sister mentioned it again, the politician, we think they are leaders. Look, today, if you ask the president of Ghana, the president of Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, you ask them, they should tell you what AI is. I'm betting you that if you score them 1 out of 10, they'll get like 3. They don't even understand. If you go to the Legislative Assembly, the people who formulate these policies, if you ask them that, what is AI? What is the future of AI? They don't know. So the people who are supposed to help our country or our continent grow don't even understand how these things are supposed to be handled. And the universities too are isolated. Every day they are on strike. They are also looking for money for research, and these things are not happening. So we, those who are in the industry, including civil society organization, we have to carry this drive across. The people in the civil society, the IT or tech companies in Africa, we are supposed to take this and continue this kind of conversation, and also in front of these politicians, so that we can be able to let them know the future of whatever we are doing. So that is what I want to add up.
Yeah. I'm just going to take a few questions from the Q&A in the chat. There's an interesting one here asking who has decided what AI is the way forward and forward to what exactly? And I think that's really interesting, because there may be we may have to clarify one thing first before we jump to the idea that it is. And I'm going to lump that one with another question asking about whether the BRICS community can be a support to Africa itself in terms of developing its AI strategy. So I don't know who would like to sort of start with that first one.
I'll take a stab at it. So I was one of those skeptics about AI, and I'm still figuring it out. I won't say I'm one of those who has totally, but I've been forced to deal with it because I've seen how AI is taking over, even just HR functions. It's taking over even our cell phones, right? When you're just on it, all these, you see our consumer habits, and you're seeing them off the phones. And I think one of the things I'm noticing is that we have to, and I went to Davos this past January, and I saw the conversation is that AI. And prior to Davos, I was experiencing it. And remember, I've also lived on the continent, even gone to college, some college there before transferring here, and then experiencing, working and seeing that the future of work changing and the landscape is changing. And I also sit on a board of a university, Berkeley College, and seeing things are changing fast and visions. Remember, many times companies had visions of over 50 years. Now you have to reassess your vision and adapt to the ever fast evolving marketplace. So that to address that whole thing about who determines what AI is, it's the same thing like before we use the cell phones, we never wanted to use them, right? And then you never wanted to use an Apple phone. I didn't use an Apple phone until a couple of years back, but I had to adapt to it. And sometimes I think it's also cultural fears as well as religious fears. People associating it with mark of the beast and that kind of thing, And I mean, I'm someone who identifies as a Christian, but I also have to look at the reality. So I think because sometimes when you don't know how to deal with something, you think of a reactionary way of dealing with it. And you say, oh, who did it? You want to just dismiss it and throw it under the rug, but it's not going away. You'll end up without a job if you're not careful. So maybe try to adapt, look at it and say, you know what? Maybe I'm a Christian person. Maybe I'm a Muslim. Maybe I'm a Jewish person. Maybe I'm a woman, an African woman, and this and that. How can I make AI push what might work for me? Maybe become a researcher, do some stuff in AI, and you might find a solution that will help you deal with that fear you're dealing with. Now, for me, I was forced to now pay attention to all these conversations, and I've also been forced to learn more about it and see how I can, because I do a lot of speaking engagements, I do a lot of empowering people. How do I share this knowledge in a way that a layperson will understand it and it's not complex? Because sometimes you think AI and you think, oh, you have to be an engineer, you have to be a medical doctor. You think about it as heavy science, and yet even it's a wide area. You could do marketing in AI. You could do, learning about it to help your HR company. It's vast, but it's here and it's being used in most of the things. So I think that's how I would say, who determines? Well, the trends are determining, and we can't really, and is it something that I'm concerned about? To some extent, but that's what gives me every reason to pursue and understand more about it so that it doesn't swallow me up.
Thank you. I've got another question here in the chat. What are some successful AI projects or initiatives that have been implemented in Africa to tackle local challenges? David, I don't know if you'd like to start with this one.
Yeah, sure. So there are some practical ones. For example, for African languages, we have like translation tools that have been built, and also like dialogue tools. For example, there's a successful project in Rwanda during COVID where they actually built chatbots to help people. And this is actually is based on some of the works we have been doing in terms of like building models and data sets for African languages. And this is just one. And there are also some funding initiatives that try to also help some of these initiatives. I know of a few of other projects around health in Africa, but in terms of language, and don't underestimate the power of simple tools like translation tools or speech recognition. They have a lot of applications in different, from businesses to health, even in HR and so many sectors of the economy and education. So I think these are some practical applications here.
Yeah, I think one of the things I would mention is, well, so healthcare is like one of the most impactful areas, and one of the biggest successes that we have on the continent is with TB. So TB is one of the biggest infectious disease worries across the continent. It's the highest killer of people living with HIV/AIDS, and it's high on the list of like 5 diseases that affect people the most across the continent. So there is a project that is being run by Delft University. Delft University is a Netherlands-based research institution that has built a sort of AI system to speed up the process of diagnosing TB for people. And the challenge that exists is the fact that diagnostic capacities are very limited across the continent. The way you can do diagnosis is like very far for a lot of people. So the idea that Delft did was to find a way to build out an infrastructure that speeds up the diagnosis, and they now leveraged AI on that infrastructure, which sort of goes back to what someone said the other time about who decides what the priority is. Now, I think we have basic problems on the continent that we need to fix. But the fact that we've not fixed those basic problems does not mean that we can't aspire or can't look at how new tools can help us solve existing problems. And this TU Delft is being run across, I think, 9 countries in Africa. Nigeria is inclusive. And it's a very, very important and interesting story. If you have the time, you can read about it. In Nigeria, for example, they've integrated with the KNCVB project that is meant to help manage and treat TB on the continent. And they are doing that across 8 other countries. So that is a very, very good example of how AI is helping Africans, you and I, people like us, your brothers, sisters, mothers, daughters, to speed up the process of diagnosing TB. Because the earlier you can diagnose TB, the earlier you start treatment, the better the outcomes. So that's like a very good success story out there.
Thank you. I'm just cognizant of how much time we have left. So I just want to ask a question I asked previously, but I don't think we got enough time to really delve into it. So in terms of, as we are going into sort of 2024 is a huge election year, and we want to keep, people mentioned how I want our leaders to be accountable and people who are in charge to drive AI development and adoption and regulation on the continent. What would you then, assuming everything goes well this year in terms of election on the continent, what would you then expect policy, short, long, medium, long-term policy discussions and solutions to include? Or rather, let me condense that question for the sake of time. What is one policy action that you think would reap the biggest benefit for AI adoption and development on the African continent?
Yes, I think I'll start. I think for me, one of the things that I'm most interested in is open data. Like David mentioned, and the other person has mentioned, data is the lifeblood of AI. And if we can solve the access to data problem, then we're going to speed up a lot of our research outcomes. We're going to speed up a lot of innovations for AI on the continent. A very, very important area is in healthcare, where if you need to build anything in healthcare right now, if you don't have connections to someone that can get you data, then you might not be able to get the appropriate data you need, especially if you're looking at clinical use cases. If you have to buy the data, then the data is super expensive. So this takes the ability to use this data above the capacity of people that are just one random whiskey that is in his room in Unilag that has a very great idea but cannot access the data. So one of the things that I think we need to solve is that access to data. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to fund data curation projects across the continent that would give back to data that anybody can access for free with some limitations so that people can't just misuse that data. But that would significantly accelerate the research and output of AI on the continent.
Jabal, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah. I think fostering an enabling environment is what is required to prioritize local communities and borderless participation. So what I think we have to do as a people is to make sure, look, we cannot, AI is here to stay, no matter what. People say AI is going to take a lot of jobs. Yes, it is also going to create a lot of job opportunities and make life very simple for us. So all what we need to do is to continue having these kind of conversations in the public places, because it's like Africa, we are not talking more about AI. Now, IO is talking about health. In fact, we are trying to build AI into education, making sure that we digitalize the whole Ghana's educational system using AI. That is what we are currently working on in the company. Also, we have a friend who's also building AI that can help individuals to ask issues relating to legal questions. Instead of you going to a lawyer in Ghana here, translating those questions into local languages. So all we need to do is to increase this kind of conversation in public places. IT guys have to be more proactive in discussing issue about AI. So that is, we have to move from just software development, software engineering, website development, concentrating on deep learning, machine learning, and AI. And that is where it is going to help us transform the economies. And also, when it comes to data analytics, if you look at the current trend, you cannot form proper policy without data. So all we need to let governments know is that if you want to generate enough revenue, if you want to collect tax from more people, all you have to do is that you have to integrate AI into your activities. Now they ask you what is AI. That is where they will see the importance of AI in health, education, and environment. Thank you.
Thanks. Abusi, would you like to add anything?
Okay, yes. So when you think about AI, as my brothers Ayomide, Jabbar, and David have said, it's I think the key thing that people want to hear is that it's applicable to us. It's not what the Western world necessarily looks at AI. Like for us, it's basic necessities like healthcare, clean water, all those things. How education, as well as, what is important to different countries on the continent is different from what is probably an interest for the Western world. And it's so back to, I think, showing people that, you know what, when you talk about AI, it can be used to deal with the challenges that are on the continent, not the macro level that you're thinking of, that's like one size fits all. It can be broken down. And this is where the digital literacy comes into play, both from a policy point of view, educating the policymakers, politicians, and every stakeholder regarding this AI and the benefits and where it is today and how being left behind can have implications on us, but also how can we apply it in a way that makes sense to us, like for us, by us kind of situation, and establishing a thriving ecosystem and then also educating the grassroots, the people on their children on what is happening and how, and then fast forward, how do we encourage these stakeholders from investing in our ecosystem and strengthening our ecosystem, providing resources in terms of where can we get this data, as Ayomide seems to refer that data is king. Also the funding, because funding impacts a lot of things as well. We can't ignore it. And I think that's also one of the challenges we are facing on the continent. And also the security, the cybersecurity of all this data, And but I'm still hopeful, because at least we're having these conversations, and I believe this is just the beginning of many conversations which will benefit the continents, African continent, and even go as far as different languages, because we have Francophone Africa, we have Anglophone Africa, we have Portuguese Africa, we have Spanish Africa, German Africa, and Italian. You know, we have different countries have different interests, but how can you make it work? And this comes back to the collaborations and partnerships and avoiding to operate in silos.
David, any final thoughts?
Not exactly. Yeah.
All right. Thank you all to our panelists. I've realized that we're just out of time. Unfortunately, we haven't got any more time for more questions, but thank you once again for your insights. It's been a great and interesting dialogue with you. And thank you to our audience for your engagement and the questions that you asked. Once again, thank you to the Center on Public Diplomacy and for helping us organize this event. And if you would like to see more what we do at the Black Policy Institute, we are tppi.org. And once again, thank you. I think that's it for today.